In February 2015, 3 British schoolgirls left the UK to join the extremist Islamic group ISIS, a jihadi terrorist group whose name stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. One of these schoolgirls was Shamima Begum, who 3 weeks after becoming a member married a Dutch ISIS fighter. Her and her husband had 2 children whilst living in the ISIS stronghold of Baghouz, but both died of malnutrition and illness. So when she became pregnant for a 3rd time, she fled Baghouz to a refugee camp, and there asked to return to the UK to live in peace with her child. She's now, but Sajid Javid, the British Home Secretary at the time, stripped her of her citizenship to stop her. So she currently lives in a refugee camp where in March 2019 her 3rd child died. She's now using the legal system to fight the revocation of her citizenship, which leads me to the question, how is the revocation of ISIS sympathiser Shamima Begum's UK citizenship demonstrated the growing problem of radicalisation? First, I think it's relevant to give some context to the actor of ISIS. This terrorist organisation at its peak warned over 6 to 7 million people in Iraq and Syria, but earlier this year lost all of its remaining territory. However, ISIS attacks have never been limited by territory, and in fact, over 1,200 people outside of Iraq and Syria have been killed in attacks inspired or coordinated by ISIS. ISIS is able to do this by recruiting people online through radicalisation, a dynamic process whereby an individual increasingly accepts or supports ideas of violent extremism. Reasons for this process may vary, but many are related to the identity of the individuals involved, so I'm choosing to look at this case study through the lens of identity, which I'm splitting into 4 branches: nationality, religion, age, and gender. First, I'll look at nationality, and how it relates to the concept of human rights and sovereignty. To acquire, change, or retain a nationality is seen as a fundamental human right, which are the indivisible rights all human beings are entitled to by virtue of their humanity. This right is codified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN says in order to comply with human rights obligations, states are prohibited from the arbitrary deprivation of an individual's nationality. In Shamima Begum's case, as information about her involvement in ISIS is of questionable validity and there's no way to determine if she could commit acts of terrorism in the future, there's a strong argument that the actions of the British Home Secretary fall under arbitrary deprivation of her nationality. The UN says this now places Begum at a disadvantaged situation concerning the fulfilment of her rights, as she's now more vulnerable to human rights violations. But the UDHR is only soft law. States don't have to ratify the human rights and retain the right to exercise their sovereignty, their ability to govern the country as they see fit. By revoking Begum's citizenship, though, Sajid Javid can be said to be ensuring the government's authority over its borders, population, and the nation's freedom from external threats. Additionally, we cannot ignore the history of conflict between ISIS and Western countries. Conflict as a central concept in this issue, conflict can be defined as actors in pursuit of incompatible goals. The ideological differences between ISIS and policies in Western countries have led to this conflict becoming violent, and in the past the UK has been heavily involved in military attacks against ISIS, such as the Battle for Mosul, which had an estimated 10,000 civilian casualties. But ISIS attacks on Western countries have been equally violent, such as ones in recent years in Paris, Brussels, Nice, and the Manchester bombings. These are extreme acts of direct violence, such as when individuals or groups are physically or mentally harmed through the direct action of others. The Manchester bombings may also be a key factor in the Home Secretary's decision to revoke Begum's citizenship, as her affiliation with ISIS might make many UK citizens who remember the devastating 2017 attacks feel unsafe and threatened. Secondly, I'll explore this issue through the lens of religion. Article 18 of the UDHR says that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. But it can be argued that this freedom is being compromised in the UK due to pressure on Muslims because of the UK's perception of Islam. This can be seen as an infringement on an individual's negative liberty, which refers to their freedom from external coercion and pressure. The British media played a huge role in facilitating Islamophobia by promulgating derogatory depictions of Islam in the mainstream media, which contributes to an atmosphere where ordinary British Muslims face demonisation. The portrayal of Islam in the British media has led to more than half of Britons seeing Islam as a threat to Western liberal democracy, and hate crime against Muslims continues to rise, up by 70% in the last year according to the Metropolitan Police. This is relevant as ISIS fighters point to Western threats against Muslims in order to recruit new members. They spread images that characterise the West as the enemy and create propaganda images that include Muslim women and children injured after Western attacks. This encourages ISIS sympathisers to subscribe to the view of us versus them, and ISIS is primarily a young audience, teenagers like Shamima Begum, find these arguments convincing as narratives of fundamentalist Islam have been developing for more than 40 years. Unfortunately, government policies countering radicalisation are based on the belief that ISIS recruits disenfranchised, vulnerable and poor. But this narrow and problematic demographic fails to recognise another key factor in radicalisation: age. Therefore, I'll be using age as a third branch of identity through which I can examine how globalisation has affected this political issue. A key factor in this issue is globalisation, which is the increasing interaction and interconnectedness of states, economies and populations. This, as well as developments in technology, have led to increased radicalisation amongst the younger generations. It's important to note that statistics on ISIS recruitment is are very unreliable, and estimates differ greatly between intelligence agencies. But in current demographics, we're experiencing what is called a Muslim youth bulge, as 60% of Muslims in Muslim-majority countries are under the age of 30. Additionally, underlying grievances that drove radicalization in past generations of Sunni Muslims remain salient in millennials and Gen Z. This can be further related to identity, as the grievances experienced by young Muslims lead many to join radical groups to get a sense of identity and belonging. A report on Salafi jihadis said that the continued economic stagnation, as well as high youth unemployment rate exacerbated by this Muslim youth bulge, could lead to further expectations and spur radicalization amongst disenchanted Gen Z Muslims. Age also plays a part in the increasing problem of radicalization, as millennials and Gen Zs are distinguished by their strong familiarity with technology. This is especially threatening, as it could foreshadow uncontrollable and widespread online radicalization and a new era of adaptive cyber-based terrorism. Therefore, it's clear how terrorist organizations can exploit the interconnectedness and technological advancements of globalization to attract young individuals like Begum. As Shamima Begum was only 15 when she joined ISIS, many perspectives argue that her young age and lack of naivety should be recognized. After all, international human rights law states that children should not be allowed to fight and their youth and innocence should be protected, as children are so easy to exploit. Next, I want to consider this political issue through my final pillar of identity, gender. The UN Security Council said there's an urgent need to monitor female jihadis, and the gendered assumption that women lack agency can have serious security implications, letting dangerous acts slip through the cracks. The UN Counter-Terrorism Committee said that even the sentence given to terrorists show relative leniency towards women. These gender assumptions seem to exist because women's roles in ISIS activities are not as clear or as punishable as men. But women can be involved in ISIS recruitment, propaganda activities, and spread radical ideas to encourage others to commit attacks. The assumption that women are less radicalized may seem to benefit women like Begum, but in the long run will cause significant harm. The UN report warned that as a result of these assumptions, women tend to receive more limited rehabilitation and reintegration support, putting them at a potentially greater risk of re-radicalization. This gender inequality can be seen through the theoretical perspective of feminism, as differences between the treatment of men and women are having profound impacts on their lives. It can be argued that jihadi brides themselves seek to challenge Western-imposed gender norms by joining ISIS, which rejects Western feminism. And ISIS recruitment targeting women often relies on the message of empowerment, but in reality, ISIS is a misogynistic organization that has frequently inflicted harm on women, such as sexual violence and kidnapping. But overall, the dialogue around jihadi brides suggests that gender is another branch of identity that should not be underestimated when considering the threat of terrorists. Finally, I'll explore some of the different perspectives and possible outcomes of this issue. The British Home Secretary denied Begum citizenship on the basis that she could apply for Bangladeshi citizenship given her parents' ancestry. But Bangladeshi authorities have denied her citizenship and she is now stateless. And under the aforementioned human rights laws, is appealing the revocation of her UK citizenship. There are many possible outcomes to this. First, she could still be sent to Bangladesh, where she may face the death penalty for her involvement in terrorism. Alternatively, her Dutch husband is hoping she'll be granted Dutch citizenship, but this relies on her underage marriage being legitimised in the Netherlands, which is highly unlikely. So therefore, Begum's best hope of leaving the Syrian refugee camp where her third child died relies on her winning her appeal in the UK. However, the High Court have recently ruled against the restoration of the passports of 2 female terrorists, similar to Begum, which sets a precedent to stop her re-entering the country. Perspectives on what should happen to Shamima Begum vary greatly. The Kurdish authorities, who are key actors in the fight against ISIS, said that if these children are not returned to their country, they will all become future terrorists. Conversely, many British citizens found Begum's interviews particularly chilling, especially her claims to be unfazed by beheadings. It's unclear what should happen to Shamima Begum. What is clear is that there is a growing rate of radicalization amongst the young Muslim population in Western countries. As disenfranchised young Muslims join radical Islamic terrorist groups, governments are faced with the difficult question of how to deal with threats from their own citizens. This issue is of clear significance, as it can be argued that the instability and fractured political and religious divides in the Middle East will give jihadi terrorist groups opportunities to revive themselves and grow. To conclude, components of an individual's identity, their nationality, religion, age, and gender are all factors that need to be carefully considered by government. Only by understanding ISIS as an organisation and how identity may factor into radicalisation can governments counter this form of terrorism.